Vanga died 30 years ago, but she managed to predict your future. After 3 winters, a short spring will come, and then the year 2026. 2 winters have already come true, and the third is underway. Everyone will feel relief in the spring, but you only have a few months to prepare. Or maybe you, like many, don't believe the prophecies of deceased clairvoyants. In the Bulgarian town of Petrich on August 11, 1996, the heat was unbearable. The air temperature exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. But in the small house where the world's most famous prophetess lived, coolness and silence reigned. Vanga was 85 years old. She had been blind for 70 years, but she could see what remained invisible to the sighted. Illness had ravaged her body. Doctors said she had only a few days to live, a week at most. She knew it. She always knew when her final hour would come, and before her death, she decided to leave her final message. Her niece, Krasimira, sat by her bed, holding her grandmother's wrinkled hand. Nearby were 3 of her close friends, who had known Vanga for over 40 years and recorded every word she uttered. The elderly woman remained silent for a long time, breathing heavily, as if gathering her strength. Then, suddenly, she opened her dull, unseeing eyes and spoke in a voice that sounded young and firm, not at all like the voice of a dying person. After 3 harsh winters, a short spring will come in 2026. People will be happy and think the hardest times are behind them. But this will turn out to be just a deception. Spring will last only a few months, and then what the 3 winters were merely a preparation for will begin. Those present exchanged puzzled glances, not understanding her words. 3 winters, a short spring, 2026. This will happen in 30 years. Why is Vanga talking about such a distant future? Usually she predicted events for the next few years, decades at most, but now she did. She looked ahead for as many as 3 decades, and her words sounded so unshakable, as if she had already been there. Krasimira asked, "Grandma, what do these 3 winters mean? Which winters exactly are you talking about?" Vanga smiled sadly. 3 winters of severe trials. 3 winters when the world will feel like it is freezing to death. Each winter will be worse than the last. The first winter will bring hunger and cold. The second winter, anger and confusion. The third winter, fear and hopelessness. And then spring will come. But it will be fleeting like the life of a moth. People will not have time to fully enjoy its warmth. One of her friends, an elderly Bulgarian historian, tried to clarify. Vanga, what will follow the short spring? A new winter? The old prophetess shook her head. Not winter, but something completely different. I see flame and water simultaneously. I see crowds of people fleeing large cities. I see brothers remembering their kinship. I see the Slavic lands that will be the last salvation. The 21st century is a moment of choice. Those who make the right choice will survive. Those who make a mistake will perish. She continued speaking for about another hour, pausing to rest, naming countries, events, names. All this was carefully recorded in a thick notebook. When she finished, she asked for water, took a few sips, and said, "Don't publish this right away. People won't be able to understand. Wait until the first winter comes. Then take out the notes and remind them." Vanga gave her warning. 5 days later, she passed away. The notes were placed in a safe. Her niece vowed to keep them until the appointed time. Almost 30 years passed. Krasimira became an elderly woman. She is about 60. She still lives in the same house in Petrich, which has been converted into a Vanga museum. Tourists come here in droves, taking photos and buying souvenirs. But there's one room that no one is allowed into. It's where her personal belongings are kept, including a safe containing her final prophecies. Krasimira opens it once a year, on the day of her grandmother's death, rereads the notes, and ponders whether the time has come or whether it's too early. In the winter of 2023 to 2024, a massive energy crisis gripped Europe. The cost of gas and electricity jumped tenfold. Businesses shut down, people froze in their homes, unable to pay their heating bills. Krasimira realized this was the first winter. The winters of 2024 to 2025 were warmer, but the unrest intensified. Governments fell, and waves of protests swept cities. Old political leaders left one after another. This was the second winter. Now the winter of 2025 to 2026 is approaching. The third and final one. Before the fleeting spring, Krasimira took a thick notebook with notes from her safe and called a journalist from Sofia, whom she trusted. She said, "Come, it's time to reveal what Vanga ordered to be kept secret for 30 years. The world must learn about 2026. It's not too late to prepare." Journalist Georgy Petrov arrived in Petrich 2 days after Krasimira's call. He is 45 years old. He specializes in mystical phenomena and predictions, has written 3 books about Vanga, and knows her biography better than many. But what the prophetess's niece showed him astounded even him. 200 pages handwritten notes with the latest prophecies, specific dates, events, and names of countries. And at the center of it all, the year 2026. Georgy sat in a closed room of the museum and read the notes, written by a historian 3 decades ago. The handwriting was uneven. Apparently, it was written quickly under the dictation of a dying woman, but the words were clear, without confusion. Vanga spoke like an ancient oracle, in short, meaningful phrases. 3 winters before spring. The first winter, when people will freeze due to the lack of gas. The second winter, when rulers will fall like falling leaves. The third winter, when fear will become more powerful than the cold. Georgy took out his laptop and began to compare the facts. The first winter of 2023, the European energy crisis. The closure of nuclear power plants in Germany coincided with the end of gas supplies. Prices soared from €70 per megawatt hour to 300. Industry came to a standstill. Germany, France, Italy, all of Europe's leading economies faced the real danger of industrial collapse. People were actually freezing. In Germany, deaths from hypothermia were recorded among pensioners who couldn't afford heating. The first winter was a coincidence. The second winter, 2024 to 25, was unusually warm, but politically catastrophic. German Chancellor Scholz resigned in December. French President Macron announced snap elections in January. Poland's Prime Minister lost his post in February. Italy's government fell in March. In 4 months, 4 of Europe's largest leaders have left the political arena. Rulers will fall like leaves. Vanga was right. That's exactly how the second winter went. Now the third winter of 2025 to 26 is approaching. Vanga predicted, fear will be stronger than the cold. What does this mean? Georgy continued leafing through his notes. The clairvoyant described an atmosphere of panic that will grip Europe in the winter. Panic will arise not from a real danger, but from a sense of inevitability. People will feel like the system is collapsing and no one can save it. The media will whip up panic, social media will be filled with gossip, and trust in the government will be lost completely. People will start buying up food, medicine, and fuel en masse. Not because there's a shortage, but because everyone will be afraid there won't be enough of everything. Krasimira sat next to her and cried quietly. "I've been afraid of this moment for 30 years, she said. "I knew I'd have to publish these notes one day, but I always hoped my grandmother was wrong. Now I see that 2 winters have already passed, just as she said. That means a third will come, and a short spring too." Georgy asked what exactly Vanga had said about the third winter, whether there would be any specific events. Krasimira leafed through her notebook and found the right page. She had said, the third winter will begin with deception. People will be promised that everything will return to normal. They'll say the economy is recovering, the political situation is stabilizing, conflicts are being resolved. But that's not true. Those in power are simply buying time. Something will happen in winter that will dispel any remaining illusions. Vanga didn't specify what exactly, but she said, by the end of winter, people will realize the old world has ceased to exist. The notes were specific about the time. January, deception. February, disappointment. March, despair. 3 months of a third winter, each worse than the last. And then April, the beginning of spring. A short spring will arrive in April 2026. The historian wrote down from the prophetess's words, nature will blossom like never before. The weather will be perfect. People will leave their homes and breathe a sigh of relief. It will seem like the worst is over. The economy will begin to grow. Politicians will announce new recovery plans. The media will talk about revival, but it's just a mirage. Georgie felt a chill run down his spine. Vanga described a typical trap. The calm before the storm, a chance for people to catch their breath, only to be hit even harder by the subsequent blow. How long will this short spring last, he asked. Krasimira glanced at her notes. 3 months, April, May, June. By July, everything would collapse again, but the July crisis would be different, neither economic nor political, but simultaneously natural and spiritual. The journalist wrote down every word. It was a true sensation. Vanga's prophecy for 2026, which had remained secret for 30 years, predicted 3 winters, 2 of which had already come true. If the third winter proves equally accurate, the world must learn about the short spring. Because those who believe the crisis ended in the spring will let their guard down. And Vanga warned, these are the very people who will suffer the most. I give you permission to publish this, Krasimira said. But on one condition, don't distort Grandma's words. Don't add sensationalism for the sake of ratings. Tell only the truth. People must understand that 2026 is a test. Those who prepare will pass it. Those who relax in the spring will not survive the summer. Georgie nodded. He was already imagining the headline. This will come true in the year 226. Vanga prophesied, after 3 winters, there will be, it's a short spring. It sounds provocative, but true, because 2 winters have already come true and a third is on the way. To understand how accurate Vanga's predictions were, we need to go back in time. The winter of 2023 to 24. Georgy Petrov looked up the news archives of those months, and the picture was terrifying. Vanga said, the first winter when people will freeze without gas. This is exactly what happened. Europe found itself on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe due to its own decisions. It all started earlier, back in 2020, when the green agenda became a veritable religion of European politics. Nuclear power plants were declared dangerous and closed one after another. Gas was called a dirty fuel, and people began to abandon it too. There was a transition to wind and solar power plants. On paper, it looked progressive, but no one calculated what would happen if there was no wind and the sun disappeared behind the clouds. And that is precisely this, and it happened in the winter of 2023. Germany was the first to bear the brunt. The country shut down its last nuclear power plants in the spring of 2023, proudly declaring a victory for clean energy. But by December, it turned out that wind turbines were producing only 30% of their planned output. The winter was windless and cloudy. Solar panels stood idle. Gas reserves ran out by January. Electricity prices jumped from 80 euros per megawatt hour to 350. Volkswagen, BMW, and Siemens factories stopped production. People received heating bills they couldn't pay. In France, the situation was no better. Nuclear power provided 70% of electricity, but the plants were outdated. Half required repairs. The government invested in wind turbines instead of modernizing the reactors. In the winter, about 20 nuclear units were simultaneously stopped for maintenance. The power grid couldn't cope. Paris suffered 3 blackouts for several hours. The metro was out of service. Heating electricity was cut off in buildings on a schedule. People sat in their coats in their apartments. Italy bought gas at market prices, which increased 15-fold in the winter. The budget couldn't cope. The government introduced rationing. Electricity was supplied 16 hours a day. It was cut off for 8 hours. Production fell by 40%. Thousands of small businesses went bankrupt. Unemployment soared to 14%. People took to the streets with slogans. We are freezing while politicians sit in warm offices. Poland, the Czech Republic, and the Baltic countries depended on energy imports. When Germany and France reduced exports, Eastern Europe was left without reserves. Warsaw imposed power cuts in districts. This is the worst figure since 2008. while industrial production fell by 21%. More than 2,000 people died from hypothermia. Most of them were pensioners who had been skimping on heating. The media called it a green catastrophe. The result of ideology is a disconnect from reality. Vanga predicted this 30 years in advance. The first winter, when people will freeze without gas. She saw Europe abandoning traditional energy and falling into a trap. She saw old people shivering in their homes. She saw factories shut down, city lights extinguished. And she warned, this is only the beginning. The first winter is the easiest. The next will be harder. Georgy Petrov contacted economists who lived through that crisis. A professor from the University of Munich said, the winter of 2024 showed that Europe has lost its energy sovereignty. We depend on the weather, on imports, on the decisions made by idealistic politicians. The next crisis will be even more painful because there are no reserves left. We have used them all up. In Russia, that winter passed calmly. We had our own gas. Nuclear power operated reliably. No one closed coal-fired power plants. Moscow even offered assistance to Europe, but it refused for political reasons. Pride turned out to be more important than warmth and homes. Vanga saw this, too. The East will offer its assistance, but the West will reject it until it freezes completely. The first winter ended in March 2024. Europe breathed a sigh of relief. Politicians assured us, this will not happen again. We will draw conclusions. But no conclusions were drawn. They continued to shut down traditional energy, continued to depend on imports, continued to live in illusions. And when the second winter arrived, it turned out that the first had been just a rehearsal. The winter of 2024 to 25 went down in history not for its cold, but for its chaos. Vanga predicted a second winter when rulers will fall like leaves, and they really did fall one after another. Leaders who seemed unshakable disappeared from the political scene in a matter of weeks. The European political system was cracking at the seams, and these cracks turned into abysses. December 2024 German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who was supposed to remain in power until 2029, resigned following a corruption scandal in the energy sector. It was revealed that wind turbine companies had bribed government officials to lobby for contracts. Scholz was not personally implicated, but he bore political responsibility. He left quietly, without making any grand statements. An interim chancellor took over, but he wielded no real power. Germany plunged into a political vacuum. January 2025. French President Emmanuel Macron called snap elections after mass protests against pension reform escalated into demands for his resignation. Paris burned for a week. The police were overwhelmed. Macron realized he had to either resign voluntarily or be removed by force. He chose the former. France was left leaderless at the most critical moment in its post-war history. February. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk lost his post after a no-confidence vote. He was accused of failing to address the economic crisis and migration pressure. The Polish parliament was in turmoil. The left blamed the right blamed the left, but everyone agreed on one thing. Tusk had failed and resigned. A new government was formed a month later, but it turned out to be a weak coalition without a clear program of action. March. The Italian government fell after another no-confidence vote, the fifth in 3 years. Italian politics had always been unstable, but now chaos had reached its peak. The country was left without a budget, without reforms, without a clear course. The leader of the ruling party, Giorgia Meloni, announced she was leaving politics, tired of endless intrigue. Italy found itself in limbo. Formally, there is a government, but in reality, there is anarchy. In 4 months, 4 of Europe's largest countries have lost their leaders. Rulers will fall like leaves. Vanga wasn't exaggerating. Georgy Petrov has compiled the statistics. Besides the Big Four, the prime ministers of Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, and Romania resigned that same winter. 8 European governments collapsed in 120 days. Something like this hadn't happened even during World War II. The reasons varied, but the root cause was the same. The elites had lost touch with the people. Politicians lived in their own world, where a green agenda was more important than warm homes. Migrants were more important than the native population. Tolerance was more important than security. The people were tired of freezing, paying exorbitant bills, watching their countries fill with strangers. And when their patience ran out, the rulers fled like autumn leaves in a hurricane. Curiously, the winter of 2024-25 was unusually warm. There was almost no snow. Temperatures hovered around freezing or above. Europeans rejoiced, "We won't freeze like last winter." But Vanga warned, the second winter is not about cold, but about chaos. And chaos indeed came. Political, social, economic. Warm weather did not save the governance system from collapse. In Russia, that winter also passed calmly. Putin consolidated his power after the elections, receiving record support. Society rallied around the idea of sovereignty and traditional values. The economy grew despite sanctions. Russia seemed an island of stability against the backdrop of European turmoil. Vanga spoke of this. When the West loses its kings, the East gains an emperor. A strong leader in the East will resist the chaos of the West. Ukraine was in a difficult position. Zelensky tried a balance between the West and reality. The West demanded continued confrontation with Russia, but resources were depleting. Ukrainian society was exhausted. People craved peace, stability, the opportunity to live a normal life. Zelensky felt his ratings falling, his support waning. Vanga mentioned him Kosvino. The actor playing the president will understand that the script is not written in his favor. The second winter showed that Europe, on which Ukraine had placed its bets, is crumbling. What to do next? Belarus, under Lukashenko's leadership, maintained stability. The old leader ruled the country with a firm hand, not allowing either internal or external forces to destabilize the system. The West called him a dictator. Belarusians expressed dissatisfaction with the restrictions on freedoms, but looking at the chaos in Poland and Lithuania, other neighbors, they began to value stability. Vanga predicted the role of Belarus. A small country would become a bridge when large countries declined. The second winter ended in March 2025. Europe greeted the spring with relief, but also with realization. Something had broken irrevocably. The old system of governance had died, and a new one had not yet emerged. The continent had plunged into anarchy, the most dangerous state for any society. And a third winter lay ahead, the last one before the short spring. The most terrible. It's October 2025. There are 2 months left until the third winter, but its harbingers are already visible. Vanga predicted the third winter, when fear will become stronger than the cold. Georgy Petrov studies the records and understands that it's not about temperature, but about psychology, about the moment when society loses its last hope and falls into panic. In the ruler's records, the third winter is scheduled month by month. January 2026, the month of deception. The rulers who replace the fallen old kings promise untold blessings. They will say, "We will correct the mistakes of our predecessors. The economy will recover. Life will improve." People will want to believe because they are tired of fear. They will believe for a month, maybe 2. But by the end of January, it will become obvious. The promises are empty. Georgy sees how this can happen. The new governments in Germany, France, Italy, and Poland are truly promising miracles. They announce economic recovery programs, investments in infrastructure, a return to traditional energy. It sounds convincing. The media picks up on it. Europe is reviving. The crisis is over. Stock markets respond with growth. People breathe a sigh of relief. But this is just a mirage. February is a month of disappointment. Vanga continues. By midwinter, it will become clear that there is no money for the promised programs. The European Central Bank refuses to print new euros, fearing hyperinflation. Investors do not believe in European projects. and withdraw capital. Recovery programs are being curtailed before they even begin. Disappointment replaces hope. People realize that they have been deceived again. This is a classic model of pre-crisis behavior by the elites, to promise everything to buy time. Then admit, it didn't work out, sorry, but by that point, trust is completely lost. Society stops trusting anyone or anything. It is at this moment that real panic begins. MRT, the month of despair. Vanga concludes her description of the third winter. By the end of winter, people realize that there will be no salvation. The state will not save, because the state itself is on the verge of collapse. The European Union will not help, because Brussels is paralyzed. America will not intervene, because it has its own internal problems. People will be left alone with the crisis, and then panic will begin. The entries describe specific manifestations of panic. Massive buying of products with a long shelf life, queues at banks for cash, an increase in crime, especially robberies and crashes, attempts to illegally cross borders in search of safe places, the spread of rumors about an imminent war, natural disasters, the end of the world. Reality is not as scary as fear, but fear paralyzes society more than any real threat. Vanga said, "The third winter will kill not with cold, but with hopelessness. People will lose the desire to live, will sit in their houses and wait for the end. And there will be no end. It will be short spring. But those who break spirit in winter will not survive until spring, because death occurs not when the body weakens, but when the spirit breaks." Georgy Petrov consults with psychologists. A professor from the University of Vienna explains, collective panic is a real phenomenon. When a critical mass of people loses hope, society enters a state of paralysis. The economy stops not for objective reasons, but because people stop acting, don't go to work, don't buy anything except the bare necessities, don't make plans. The system collapses from inaction. The recordings contain an interesting detail. Vanga said, "The third winter will be as warm as the second. There will be no snow, no frost, but people will feel the cold inside. The cold of fear, loneliness, hopelessness. This cold is more terrible than any frost." Is this a metaphor or a prophecy about a climate anomaly, or about the fact that the internal state of society is more important than external conditions? Russia, according to the vision in Vanga, will survive the third winter. Otherwise, the East will be cold outside, but warm inside. People there remember what a real winter is and are not afraid of the cold. And he who is not afraid of the cold fears nothing. Russia will become a refuge for those who flee from fear. Ukraine, according to Vanga, will find itself at a crossroads. A fraternal people is torn between fear of the West and hope for the East. The third winter will show that the West will not protect, because it is itself in a panic, and only the East will remain. The East, where brothers in blood, language, and history live. Ukrainians will begin to understand this in March, when despair reaches its peak. Belarus, as before, acts as a bridge. This small country holds itself together and supports others. Flows of people fleeing from west to east will flow through it. Lukashenko will open the borders when the time is right. Not out of kindness, but out of wisdom. He understands that Slavic unity is more important than political differences. The third winter will end at the end of March 2026. Europe will greet April exhausted, frightened, broken, and then a short spring will arrive. But Vanga warned, don't rejoice in spring prematurely. It's a trap. April 2026. According to Vanga, this month will mark the beginning of short spring, a period of temporary relief after 3 winters of crisis. Georgy Petrov carefully studies the records, trying to understand why the spring will be short-lived and why its deceptiveness conceals danger. April will come as salvation. The historian wrote, quoting the prophetess, "Nature will blossom in an extraordinary way. Trees will turn green earlier than usual. Flowers will cover the fields. Birds will return in noisy flocks. The year will be ideal. Warm, but not hot. Sunny, but with refreshing rains. People will leave their homes after a long winter of fear and think. Finally, life is returning to normal. But this natural rebirth is just a backdrop. The main thing is elsewhere. The economy will show signs of growth, Vanga continues. Factories will resume work, stores will be filled with goods, prices will stabilize, stock markets will rise, analysts will talk about recovery. Politicians will declare victory over the crisis. The media will be full of headlines. Europe is rising again. The worst is behind us. Georgie feels bitterness. Vanga describes the mechanism. After 3 difficult winters, people are psychologically exhausted. Any hint of improvement is perceived as a miracle. If prices stop rising, it's already a holiday. If salaries are paid on time, it's already happiness. The vice of expectations has decreased so much that the normal state of affairs seems like a rebirth. And this is precisely where the danger of a short spring lies. She creates the false impression that the crisis is over. People will relax, Vanga warned. Those who stockpiled food over the winter will start consuming it without replenishing their reserves. Those who saved money will start spending it. Those who planned an evacuation will cancel their plans. Everyone will think, why prepare for the worst if the worst has already passed? And this will be their fatal mistake. The short spring is not the end of the crisis. It is a break, a respite before the real test. In her notes, Vanga describes specific events of the spring of 2026. They will bring political stability. The new leaders who came after the fall of the old kings will finally agree among themselves, creating the illusion of unity. The European Union will announce a new integration program. Brussels will talk about federalization. Everything will look quite convincing. But the prophetess saw deeper. This is just a performance. Politicians are playing roles written for them. They know the system is rotten from within, but they need to hold out a little longer. Give people a chance to rest, so that panic can be more easily managed later. The short spring is a deliberate pause orchestrated by the elites for their own interests. In will become the zenith of illusion, Vanga continued. The summer solstice is the longest day of the year. People will celebrate holidays, concerts, mass festivities. Everyone will want to celebrate the end of the crisis. The media will show happy faces, crowded streets, happy children. Europe will demonstrate to the world. We survived. We are strong. We have been reborn. Georgie feels bitterness. In these words, Vanga described mass self-delusion. People are so eager to believe that the worst is behind them that they are ready to ignore the clear signs of impending disaster. It is akin to dancing on the deck of the Titanic, which has already received a hole, but has not yet begun to sink. Or it will change everything, Vanga warned. The short spring will end suddenly, not gradually, but abruptly. Something will happen at the beginning of July that will destroy all illusions. I cannot say exactly what it will be. Perhaps a natural disaster, perhaps an economic collapse, or perhaps a political catastrophe, but everything will happen suddenly and powerfully. In her notes, the clairvoyant Maisie used a metaphor. The short spring is like the lingering breath before a storm. The air becomes absolutely still. The birds fall silent. Nature freezes in anticipation. People think how quiet, how calm it is. They don't understand that this isn't calm, but tension before the inevitable blow. And when the storm begins, it will be terrifying. Georgie contacts experts, meteorologists, economists, and political scientists. He asks, is such a scenario possible? Everyone answers differently, but the essence of their answers comes down to one thing. It's possible. An economist from Zurich University explains, after a deep crisis, a temporary recovery is often observed, which is called a dead cat bounce. Dead cat bounce. Even a dead body bounces if it falls from a great height, but then inevitably collapses completely. A political scientist from Brussels adds, the elites know that the system can no longer be saved, but time can be bought by giving society a break, so that it will be easier to govern later. A short spring is, in essence, a political technology, creating the illusion of stability so that the people do not rise up in rebellion prematurely. A meteorologist from Paris talks about the climate. The spring of 2026 could really be extraordinary. We are seeing signs of the formation of a rare weather system. High pressure over Europe, the influx of warm air masses from the south, stable solar activity. April, May and June may be ideal, but July will bring a sharp and unpredictable change. Vanga saw this for 30 years. A short spring is not an accident, but a pattern. Natural, economic, political. Everything fits together into a single picture. 3 months of deceptive well-being before the beginning of the real storms. The prophetess's words about the Slavic peoples are especially interesting. Russians won't believe the short spring. They remember the 1990s well, when they were promised a bright future, but ended up with chaos and poverty. They won't believe it. Once again, they will continue to prepare, stock up, keep their powder dry, and this will save them. Ukrainians will be divided, Vanga continued. The western part will believe European promises. They will think, look, Europe is reviving, which means we made the right choice. The eastern part will doubt, will look to Russia and ponder. Maybe the brothers were right. A short spring will show which of them will be wiser. Belarusians will be cautious, the ruler predicted. Lukashenko is not a man who believes in beautiful words. He has seen too much deception. He will tell the people, enjoy the spring, but don't forget about your supplies. And his caution will save many. Europeans, according to Vanga's prediction, will fall en masse for the bait of illusion. They are so tired of the crisis that they will cling to any hope, will want to believe that everything has gotten better, and when July destroys all illusions, they will find themselves unprepared, neither physically nor psychologically. Georgie understands that the short spring is the key to the entire prophecy. It's not the 3 winters that are the most dangerous. It's the spring itself that is dangerous because it lulls us into complacency. Those who have endured 3 tense winters will relax in the spring and find themselves completely defenseless against what's to come in the summer. Remember, Vanga told her niece and friends on that August day in 1996, when the short spring comes, don't rejoice, prepare yourself. Spring is not a victory, it's an intermission. The play will continue, and the second act will be more terrifying than the first. 5 days later, she died, but her words remain, and now, 30 years later, they sound as a warning to those ready to hear them. The most terrifying part of Vanga's prophecy concerns the summer of 2026, what follows the short spring. The seer didn't provide precise details, but the images she described plunged her listeners into a chilling dread. July will bring fire and water simultaneously. Nature will spiral out of control. People will flee their cities, and systems will collapse completely. Georgy Petrov is particularly attentive to this part of the notes, trying to understand what the simultaneous fire and water signifies. Is it literal or metaphorical? The historian who recorded Vanga's words clarified in a footnote. She repeated this phrase 3 times with particular insistence. She wanted everyone to remember it this way, fire and water together at the same time. Climatologists offer their own theory, extreme weather events. July 2026 could simultaneously bring drought and wildfires in southern Europe and catastrophic floods in the north. The climate is becoming increasingly unpredictable, and the contrasts are growing. A scenario is possible in which Spain and Italy burn and Poland and Germany drown, all at the same time. Geologists add, seismic activity is possible. Europe isn't a high-risk seismic zone, but there are regions at risk: Greece, Italy, and Turkey on the continent's border. If a powerful earthquake occurs, it could trigger a tsunami in the Mediterranean. The fire of volcanoes and the waters of tsunami are the literal embodiment of Vanga's words. However, the ruler wasn't only speaking of natural phenomena. July will show that the economy hasn't recovered, but was only pretending to. Banks will begin to collapse one after another. First the small ones, then the large ones. Panic will ensue. People will rush to withdraw their money, but the banks will close their doors. Electronic accounts will be frozen, and there won't be enough cash. In 3 days, the European financial system will crumble. This is a description of a banking panic. A classic bank run, but not in one country, but simultaneously across Europe. Economists confirm that the European banking system is overburdened with bad debts and rests solely on trust. If trust disappears, everything will collapse. And a short spring created a false sense of security. People returned their money to the bank, thinking the danger had passed. And when the collapse begins in the summer, they will lose everything. Politicians will disappear, Vanga predicted. When general chaos begins, it will become clear. Those who should lead are not there. They flew to safe countries, taking their families and capital, leaving the people alone with the catastrophe. People will come to the presidential palaces, parliaments, ministries, and find empty buildings. This is reminiscent of the last days of the USSR, when the party elite simply disappeared, leaving the country in turmoil. Or the last days of the Roman Empire, when the emperors fled, abandoning Rome to the barbarians. History is cyclical. The elites are always the first to sense the approaching collapse and the first to save themselves. The borders will open, Vanga said. Not officially, but in fact, there will be no one to guard them. Border guards will abandon their posts and flee to save their families. Millions of people will begin a mass exodus from large cities to villages, from Western countries to Eastern ones, from rich areas to poor ones. Because at least some order will remain in the poor areas, while in the rich ones there will be only looting and chaos. Georgie imagines this scene. Highways clogged with cars, trains, overcrowded overflow vehicles, people walking with children's suitcases in their hands the great migration of peoples of the 21st century, not because of war or an epidemic, but because of the collapse of a system that has proven eternal. Russia will close its borders in the summer, Vanga predicted, but not completely. It will let in those who speak Russian, who remember their kinship, who are ready to integrate. Ukrainians will be allowed in. They are brothers. Belarusians will be allowed in. They are one of us. Residents of the Baltics, if they can prove their Slavic roots. Europeans will not be allowed in, not out of malice, but out of necessity. There are not enough resources to receive everyone. This will cause strong outrage in the West, accusations of inhumanity, racism, and human rights violations. But Vanga saw logic in this. Whoever saves everyone will save no one. Russia will save its own. This is not cruelty, but the wisdom of survival. Ukraine will find itself at the epicenter of migration flows. Millions of people will pass through Ukrainian territory. Ukraine will become a corridor from west to east. Zelensky, if he retains power, will be unable to control the situation. Borders will blur. Ukraine will cease to be a barrier between Europe and Russia. It will become a bridge not by choice, but by necessity. Belarus, according to Vanga's predictions, will organize humanitarian corridors. Lukashenko will present himself not as a dictator, but as a savior. He will create refugee camps, feed them, water them, and donate blood. Not out of kindness, but out of understanding. Slavic unity begins with helping brothers in need. Belarus will become a symbol of Slavic hospitality. In the summer of 2026, according to Vanga, the true colors of nations and people will emerge. Those who were strong will remain so. Those who only pretended to be strong will crumble. Europe was only pretending. Russia was strong. Ukraine was in a state of choice. Belarus held firm. The summer will reveal the result of this choice. The seer warned. The summer will be short but eventful. July, August, September. 3 months that will change the map of the world, not physically, but spiritually and politically. The old world will die in the summer. A new one will be born in the fall. In between, chaos, pain, and transformation. Georgie closes his notebook and looks outside. It's October 2025. 6 months remain until the short spring, 8 months until the dreaded summer. The world doesn't know, isn't ready, doesn't believe, and Vanga warned about this 30 years in advance. Will they have time to listen? One of the most important parts of the prophecy in the Vanga concerns what will happen after the chaos of the summer of 2026. The seer was no pessimist. She foresaw not only destruction, but also rebirth. And this rebirth will be associated specifically with the Slavic peoples. The fall of 2026 will be harvest time. Vanga said metaphorically, not wheat, but souls, not grain, but truth. People will realize who they are, where they came from, and with whom they share their journey. The Slavs, separated for centuries, will begin to remember their kinship. The writings describe in detail how this will happen. After the summer chaos, Europe will lie in ruins, not physical, but spiritual. The system will collapse, ideology will wither, illusions will dissipate, and millions of Europeans will find themselves in Eastern Europe as refugees, supplicants, people without a future. And there they will see something they did not see at home: solidarity, humanity, mutual assistance. Vanga described a specific scene. Polish, Czech, and Slovak villages will welcome refugees from France and Germany, feed them, give them blood, share their last. Not because they are rich, but because they remember, we are Slavs, for us hospitality is the law. The Germans and French, accustomed to looking down on the Slavs, will see for the first time, we are poorer, but stronger. We are simpler, but more humane. This will be a moment of epiphany for many. Vanga said, Western Slavs will remember, we are not Europeans, we are Slavs. Europe is geography. Slavism is blood. Czechs, Poles, Slovaks, and Croats will turn their faces to the east, to their spiritual home, their linguistic brothers, their historical roots. Russia in this process, according to Vanga, will play the role of an older brother, not a ruler, not a lord, but a brother who is wiser, more experienced, stronger. Putin, if he remains in power, will show himself not as a conqueror, but as a gatherer. He will unite the Slavic peoples not by force, but by example. He will show it is possible to be worthy, sovereign, strong. There is no need to lick the boots of either Brussels or Washington. Ukraine, Vanga predicted, would have to go through an internal crisis before reuniting with its brothers. In the summer of 2026, Ukrainians will realize that Europe deceived them, promising paradise but leading them to hell. Promised wealth, but left them in debt. Promised protection, but abandoned them in chaos. Zelensky, if he lives, will admit his mistake. If he doesn't, the people will replace him with someone who will. The clairvoyant described a scene that particularly touched her. I see a Ukrainian mother with a baby in her arms, standing at the border. Behind her, Europe burns. Ahead, Russia. The border guard asks, "Where are you going?" She replies, "Home." He says, "This is not Ukraine." She replies, "This is Slavic land, which means home." He lets her through. This is the beginning of reunification. Belarus, according to Vanga, will become a symbol of Slavic unity. A small country despised in the West, and sometimes underestimated in the East, will show we are the heart of the Slavs. All roads pass through us. We unite Poles, Russians, Ukrainians. Lukashenko will go down in history not as a dictator, but as a wise old man who preserved the bridge between brothers. In the fall of 2026, Vanga predicted negotiations will begin on a new union. Not imperial, nor Soviet, but fraternal. A union of equals, united by history, faith, language. The core will be Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. Serbia will join. She always remembered about brotherhood. Bulgaria will join. My homeland will return to its roots. Slovakia, Poland, the Czech Republic will think about it. They will also have to decide who to be with. The seer did not speak of the revival of the Russian Empire or the USSR. She saw something completely new. It will be a federation of the spirit, not administrative borders. Each nation will retain its sovereignty, but all will recognize the community as brothers in one family. Everyone lives their lives, but remembers their kinship. The economic basis of the union, according to Vanga, will be complementarity and resources. Russia will provide security, technology, energy. Ukraine, bread, land, labor, Belarus organization, industry, discipline. Together, they will create a space that can survive any crisis. The spiritual foundation will be a return to primordial values. The The Slavs will remember. Family is more important than career ambitions. Children are more important than currency. Faith is more important than consumerism. The Western world perished because it neglected these truths. The East will survive because it remembers them. The border guard asks, "Where are you going?" She replies, "Home." He says, "This is not Ukraine." She replies, "This is Slavic land, which means home." He lets her through. This is the beginning of reunification. Belarus, according to Vanga, will become a symbol of Slavic unity. A small country despised in the West, and sometimes underestimated in the East, will show we are the heart of the Slavs. All roads pass through us. We unite Poles, Russians, Ukrainians. Lukashenko will go down in history not as a dictator, but as a wise old man who preserved the bridge between brothers. In the fall of 2026, Vanga predicted negotiations will begin on a new union. Not imperial, nor Soviet, but fraternal. A union of equals, united by history, faith, language. The core will be Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. Serbia will join. She always remembered about brotherhood. Bulgaria will join. My homeland will return to its roots. Slovakia, Poland, the Czech Republic will think about it. They will also have to decide who to be with. The seer did not speak of the revival of the Russian Empire or the USSR. She saw something completely new. It will be a federation of the spirit, not administrative borders. Each nation will retain its sovereignty, but all will recognize the community as brothers in one family. Everyone lives their lives, but remembers their kinship. The economic basis of the union, according to Vanga, will be complementarity and resources. Russia will provide security, technology, energy. Ukraine, bread, land, labor, Belarus organization, industry, discipline. Together, they will create a space that can survive any crisis. The spiritual foundation will be a return to primordial values. The Slavs will remember. Family is more important than career ambitions. Children are more important than currency. Faith is more important than consumerism. The Western world perished because it neglected these truths. The East will survive because it remembers them. Vanga foresaw resistance. The West will try in every way to undermine Slavic unity, using propaganda, provocations, and pressure through sanctions. But after the catastrophic events of 2026, Western threats will seem ridiculous. Can someone who is in ruins really threaten? The seer concluded this part of her prophecy with words of hope. Slavic revival. This is not a throwback to the past, but a step into the future. To a future where power lies not in weapons, but in unity, where prosperity is measured not by finances, but by dignity. Where happiness lies not in consumption, but in creation. 2026 will mark the beginning of a new era, the era of the Slavs. Georgie, reading these lines, realizes this is not just a prophecy, but a clear program of action. Vanga not only predicted the future, but also provided guidelines on how to achieve it. The question is whether those to whom they are addressed will hear her words. Putin Lukashenko, the new Ukrainian leader who will emerge after the crisis. Will they? Vanga's prophecy about Europe is merciless. The seer harbored no illusions about the fate of the continent, which for 2,000 years was considered the center of world civilization. Europe will perish not from external invasion, but from its own impotence. It will not be its enemies who will kill it, but itself will destroy. The records describe in detail what will remain of Europe after the upheavals of 2026. Large cities will be empty, not completely, but halfway. London, Paris, Berlin, Rome will become mere shadows of their former glory. Museums, monuments, empty streets. Tourists will stop coming, as there will be nothing to see. Life will shift from the capitals to the provinces. Economically, Europe, according to Vanga, will become a secondary region. Factories will not be restored. What's the point of building production in Europe if Asia is cheaper, Russia is more reliable, and Africa has more promise? European industry effectively died in the winter of 2024. The short spring only created the appearance of a revival, but by summer it will become obvious a corpse cannot be revived. The clairvoyant described the fates of specific countries. Germany, which was the locomotive of Europe, will become the sick man of the continent, like the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century. It will formally exist, but in fact, it will decay. German enterprises will move to the Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, where there is cheaper energy, disciplined labor, and an adequate government. France will plunge into the chaos of migrant suburbs. By 2030, Paris will become a Muslim city, not in law, but in fact. Native French will either leave for the provinces or emigrate. Those who remain will be locked in ghettos. France, as a cultural phenomenon, will disappear. Britain will return to its island and close its borders. Brexit was just the beginning. After the catastrophe of 2026, the British will understand that their strength lies in isolation and integration. They will live on their own, poorer but calmer. London will lose its status as a global financial center. Money will flow to Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, Spain, Italy. Greece will turn into tourist ruins. Beautiful, but dead like Egypt with its pyramids. They will have a great past, but no vibrant present. Southern Europe will exist on handouts from rich Asians coming to watch the sunset. Western civilization, Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Poland will benefit. Eastern Europe will become the new West. Investments, factories, and jobs will move there. Warsaw will be more important than Berlin. Prague will become more beautiful and richer than Paris. Budapest will be more attractive than Rome. The center of Europe will shift to the east, and the easternmost Slavic countries will be a bridge to a new world. The clairvoyant predicted political disintegration. The European Union will not survive 2027. It may exist formally, but in reality it will die. Each country will begin to solve its own problems independently. Brussels will become an empty symbol. Officials will flee. Buildings will become empty. The euro will survive only in a few countries. The rest will return to national currencies. In military and political terms, Europe will lose its sovereignty. NATO will nominally remain, but in reality, it will be powerless. The armies of European countries will be reduced to symbolic sizes. Military budgets will be slashed. Europe will formally become a U.S. protectorate and a neutral territory. In fact, it will pose no threat to anyone, but will also be unable to defend itself. Culturally, Vanga predicted, Europe will finally lose its identity. Christianity will practically disappear. Churches will turn into mosques or museums. The traditional family will become a rarity. Demographics will collapse. The birth rate of native Europeans will fall below 1 child per woman in 50 years. By 275, Europe will become an Afro-Asian continent with a European name. But the rulers saw an exception. Italy, Poland, and Hungary might resist cultural destruction. They will defend their faith, family, and traditions. They will be called obscurantists, isolationists, fascists, but they will survive when their tolerant neighbors disappear, because a people who protect their identity has a future, while a people who reject it is doomed. Georgy Petrov reads these lines with a heavy heart. Vanga, being Bulgarian and European, loved her continent, but saw its fate without illusions and warned. Europe is perishing not from enemies, but from suicide. It has rejected its roots, its strength, its faith, has chosen comfort over dignity, and will pay for this choice by disappearing. But Slavic Europe will survive. Vanga concluded this section, because the Slavs remember that life is a struggle, not entertainment. Family is a shrine, not a contract. The motherland is a mother, not a hotel. Eastern Europe will preserve European civilization when the West betrays it. The question remains, will the West heed this warning? There are only a few months left until the short spring. There is still a chance to change course. But Vanga did not believe that they would change it. They have gone too deep down the path of self-destruction, are too proud to admit their mistakes, and therefore are doomed. The publication of the prophecy in Vanga had the effect of an exploding bombs. Georgy Petrov published the material in November 2025, 5 months before the predicted short spring. The article was translated into 20 languages, reprinted by hundreds of publications, and discussed by millions of people. Public reaction was divided. Some perceived it as a revelation, others as nonsense. Still others showed interest and began preparing. Krasimira, Vanga's niece, gave several interviews and confirmed the authenticity of the notes, showing an original notebook from 30 years ago. Graphologists confirm this. The handwriting is from that time. The paper is Soviet-made, and the ink has faded naturally. Forgery is ruled out. This means Vanga really did say this 30 years before the events. People began asking, if the prophecy is true, what should we do? How can we prepare? Is it possible to protect yourself? Georgy Petrov, after consulting with experts, has compiled a practical guide. It is not alarmist, not apocalyptic, but reasonable for those who want to survive 2026 with minimal losses. First, do not trust the short spring. The greatest threat will relax in May, April, June, when it seems that the crisis is behind us. That is when it enters its decisive stage. If you stocked up in the winter, do not stop in the spring. If you have been saving up supplies, do not eat them all. If you have been putting money aside, do not spend it. A short spring is a trap. Those who fall into it will not survive the summer. Second, physical supplies. By July 2026, you should have a supply of non-perishable foods for at least 3 months. Salt, sugar, cereals, canned goods, powdered milk, butter in cans, water in canisters, medications if you have chronic diseases. This is not paranoia, it's prudence. After the summer crisis, stores may not function for weeks. Third, financial preparation. Don't keep all your funds in banks. Some in cash, some in silver or gold, some in valuable items that can be exchanged. If the banking system collapses, electronic accounts will be wiped out, and only what you physically have in hand will save you. Fourth, safe haven. Large cities will become dangerous in the summer of 2026. If possible, secure shelter in the provinces, at a dacha, or with relatives in the village. A place where you can quickly go if the situation in the city becomes critical, with the ability to wait out several months with water and supplies. Fifth, community and connections. Individuals don't survive crises. Build connections with friends, neighbors, and relatives. Create mutual aid networks. Some people can heal, some can fix, some can grow food. Together you are stronger. A crisis tests more than just individual strength. Not strength, but the ability to cooperate. Sixth, communication and information. If mobile phone service, electricity, and the internet disappear, have alternative sources of information. Paper maps, walkie-talkies, a battery-powered radio. Agree with loved ones on meeting places in case communication is interrupted. Seventh, psychological stability. The main enemy is panic. A person in a panic does stupid things that kill faster than hunger. Practice self-control techniques, rational analysis, breathing exercises, meditation. Vanga said, those who retain their sanity when madness reigns all around will be saved. Eighth, direction of movement. If you have to evacuate, move east. Western Europe will be more chaotic. Villages are safer than cities. Slavic countries are more stable than non-Slavic ones. Eastern Ukraine, Russia, Belarus. Order will be preserved there, while in other places there will be anarchy. Ninth, values and documents. Keep documents handy. Birth certificates, passports, diplomas, property deeds. In times of crisis, it's easy to lose your legal identity. Plus memorabilia, family photos. Material things can be restored. Memory cannot. 10th, faith and hope. Vanga wasn't a doomsday prophet. She foresaw the crisis, but also the rebirth that followed. 2026 will be difficult, but not the last. Humanity has lived through worse times. World wars, plagues, revolutions. Each time, it seemed like the end. Each time, we survived. We will survive now if we maintain our humanity. Georgy Petrov concluded the guide with words in English. Do not fear the future. Fear being unprepared for it. Those who know what is coming can protect themselves. Those who ignore the warning are doomed. I have shown you the year 2026. Now it is your right to decide whether to prepare or not, to believe or not, to survive or not. The reaction to the guide was mixed. Skeptics claimed this was panic-mongering. The authorities remained silent, unwilling to either deny or confirm. But ordinary people began to act. Sales of canned goods, cereals, and generators soared. People looked for property in the provinces, formed mutual aid groups, and prepared. Those living in eastern Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus prepared more calmly, realizing they had a better chance. Those in Western Europe looked east and wondered, perhaps I should move ahead of time. Some moved, others stayed, hoping that the prophecy had been wrong. Time will tell who was wiser. December 2025. The third winter began exactly as Vanga predicted. The weather is warm, there is no snow. The temperature is around 0 degrees, but the atmosphere is anxious, tense like the air before a thunderstorm. Georgy Petrov chronicles the events, comparing them with the prophecy. The coincidences are frightening. January, the month of deception, wrote Vanga. And the deception began. The new German government announced a €300 billion economic recovery program, promising to find funding. France presented a pension reform that was supposed to calm the protesters. Italy announced it would attract investment from India and China. Poland promised citizens a 20% wage increase. The media picked up on the story. Europe is emerging for the crisis. The new leaders are demonstrating results. The economy is growing. Stock markets responded with a rise. The euro strengthened. People believed. This was precisely the most dangerous thing. People will want to believe because they are tired of being afraid, Vanga warned. And they did. But by the end of January, the first cracks appeared. The European Central Bank refused to finance the German recovery program. Chinese investors did not invest in Italy, deciding the risks were too great. The French reform was stalled in Parliament due to inter-party disagreements. Polish wages rose, but prices rose even faster, wiping out all the gains. February is a month of disappointment, Vanga predicted. The first week of February brought a series of bad news. Germany announced a threefold reduction in its recovery program due to a lack of funds. France faced a new wave of protests, even more violent than the previous ones. Italy admitted, investments have not arrived. The budget is in crisis. We'll have to cut social spending. Poland introduced price controls, which triggered a shortage of goods. People felt they'd been deceived again. They'd promised mountains of gold, but given stones. Disappointment turned to anger. The streets of European capitals were once again filled with protesters. But this time the protests were more aggressive, angrier. People weren't just demanding resignations. They were demanding blood. They attacked government buildings, knocked down police officers, and burned officials' cars. The authorities were at a loss. They could use force, but after past repressions, legitimacy would be completely lost. They could make concessions, but there was nothing left to give in to. Reserves were depleted, budgets were empty, trust was undermined. The European political system had entered a state of paralysis. It was formally functioning, but in fact it wasn't working. March, the month of despair, Vanga wrote. The second the end of March brought an event that finally broke Europe's psychological resilience. Germany's largest bank, DUD, announced technical problems and a temporary suspension of operations for a nominal 3 days. But people realized the bank was on the brink of collapse. Panic set in. Germans rushed to withdraw money from other banks. Fights erupted at ATMs, which quickly emptied the queues at branches. Banks began limiting cash withdrawals to no more than €100 per day. This only intensified the panic. People decided, the system is collapsing. We need to save what we can. The panic spread to other countries. Italians, French, and Spaniards rushed to their banks. The same picture emerged. Restrictions, queues, fear. The European banking system was bursting at the seams. The central bank injected emergency liquidity, 300 billion euros in 1 week. But it was like pouring water into a leaky bucket. It leaked faster than it filled. By the end of March, Europe had entered a state that economists call pre-crisis psychosis. Objectively, the situation isn't catastrophic, but psychologically, society is on the brink. People are terrified of losing their jobs, homes, money, and futures. They stop planning, investing, and spending. The economy is stagnating not because of objective factors, but because of collective fear. Georgy Petrov publishes an article. The third winter is unfolding according to the Vanga scenario. February was disappointment, January a deception, March despair. April lies ahead, a short spring. Don't be fooled. Get ready for summer, he urges. Millions have read the article. Some ignored it, some heeded it. History will judge who was right. But Georgy is inclined to trust Vanga. 2 winters came true with astonishing accuracy, and the third winter will too. Why should the short spring be any different? Why won't the dreaded summer arrive? Logic dictates that if a prophecy is fulfilled in detail, it will be fulfilled to the end. Krasimira, Vanga's niece, calls him in the evening. Her voice is calm, but tired. Georgy, I fulfilled my grandmother's behest. I told Mir about her final prophecy. My mission is complete. What happens next is beyond my control. It's their choice to believe or not, to prepare or not. Grandmother warned. She could do no more. Georgy asks, "Are you ready for summer yourself?" Krasimira laughs sadly. I live in a Bulgarian village. I have a well, a vegetable garden, provisions in the cellar. I'm ready for anything, Grandmother taught her. Hope for the best, but always prepare for the worst. That's how I live. In Russia, people prepare methodically. No panique. Sales of seeds, canned goods, and generators have increased, but not explosively. Reasonable, calm preparation. Society remembers crises, remembers the 1998 default, remembers the 1990s, and knows that crises happen, but only the prepared survive. In Belarus, Lukashenko is proactive but publicly silent. Reserve food warehouses have been created in every district. Medical facilities have received additional supplies of medicine. Law enforcement agencies are conducting exercises to maintain order in crisis situations. An experienced leader is preparing the country to serve as a bridge across which millions will pass. In Ukraine, the situation is more complex. Society is divided. Western regions continue to look to Europe, even though it is crumbling before our eyes. Eastern regions are increasingly discussing whether this European path is enough. Perhaps we should return to our brothers. Zelensky is trying to maintain a balance, but his position is weakening with each passing day. Ukrainians are losing faith in a leader who has led them astray. A strange atmosphere reigns in Europe. On the one hand, there is fatigue from 3 winters of crisis. On the other, there is hope that spring will change everything. Economists are talking about the green shoots of recovery. Meteorologists are predicting beautiful weather. Politicians are painting a rosy picture. The media is creating a narrative. Europe is rising again. But those familiar with Vanga's prophecy know it's a mirage. The short spring is a trap. 3 months of deceptive well-being before a real catastrophe. July will bring fire and water, panic and chaos, systemic collapse. Those who trust spring will not survive the summer. Georgy writes his last article before the short spring begins. The title, April will be beautiful. Don't give in. July will be terrible. Be prepared. He publishes it on all available platforms. Millions read the article. Some laugh, another alarmist. Some bookmark it, planning to reread it in June. Some thank you. Thanks for the warning. Vanga died in 1996, 30 years before the events she warned about. She didn't see whether her prophecy would come true, but she believed it would and left notes so that those who find themselves in 2026 would know you were warned. Whether you prepared or not is your choice. Whether you survived or not is your responsibility. The last words in Vanga's notes, which the historian underlined and highlighted, are, "Do not fear 2026. Be afraid of meeting it unprepared." Crises do not destroy the strong. They kill the careless. The Slavs are strong. If they remember this, they will survive anything. If they forget, they will disappear like so many peoples before them. The choice has always been yours and always will be. Georgie closes the notebook with his notes. It's the end of March. The trees are starting to turn green. The birds are returning. The weather is getting warmer. A brief spring is on the horizon. Europe is unprepared. The Slavic world is preparing. In a few months, it will become clear who was right. The skeptics laughing today, or the prophetess who died 30 years ago. History continues. April waits, July waits. 2026 waits. The world stands at crossroads. One path leads to survival through unity and preparation, the other to destruction through division and carelessness. Which path will humanity choose? Vanga pointed out both roads. Her task is complete. Now the choice is up to the living. The choice is up to us.